In recent years, Warframe has enjoyed a large amount of both critical acclaim and commercial appeal, with it drawing plenty of rave reviews from many journalistic games review sources and consistently staying as one of the most played games on Steam alone. However, one of the most egregious problems Warframe has historically faced is the lack of an endgame, and the lack of a truly changing core gameplay loop, which has left many veterans feeling burned out or simply leaving until the next large content patch. As a long-time player myself, I find myself doing the same more often than not. So you might be asking, what could Railjack possibly do to tackle the endgame issue? My answer, Railjack PvP. Historically, online PvE games have struggled to meet the demand for content by players simply because the rate of content creation can never meet the rate of content consumption. Many games have tried to balance this by either adding randomly changing elements or by adding gratuitous grind, both of which Warframe do, but neither are quite fun or appreciated solutions by any community. PvP, on the other hand, is content that essentially creates itself. It is no coincidence that a very large number of the world's most played games are primarily PvP experiences, as pitting players against one another can lead to almost bespoke quality experiences, especially when given many different tools and methods by which things can be done. Such content retains a high level of replayability, as well as adding interesting social interactions and dynamics. Now, I know a lot of people will point out that PvP already exists in Warframe, and is largely underused, with good reason, many will add. And I totally agree. But let's take a look at why Conclave is not currently being played, and what Railjack could do differently. When I talk to other players about why they don't enjoy Conclave, or why they believe Conclave is underplayed, it often falls into a handful of categories. Firstly, the movement system is too annoying to deal with, either too fast or too slow. Second, balance issues, both in terms of gear and players. Third, the fact that Conclave is very distant from the pre-established gameplay loop. Fourth, lag or connection issues. And fifth, the relatively low population of Conclave. A large point of contention from players that both play and abscond from Conclave is whether the movement in PvP is either too fast or too slow. Some believe that having access to Warframe's parkour system makes the time to kill and general survivability of frames too high, as well as nullifying non-hit scan weapons. And this is especially noticeable when compounded with peer-to-peer matchmaking. Others believe that the movement is too slow, as the movement in Conclave is noticeably less extreme than in normal gameplay. Railjack can help alleviate this issue, as one of the things I and a lot of viewers noticed in regards to Railjack is that the ship moves very slowly. I believe this is a very deliberate design choice, as one of the largest issues in creating challenging experiences in Warframe stems from the fact that players have a very large amount of mobility. The toning down of this mobility in Railjack, however, could easily serve to create a less annoying system to deal with in a PvP setting. In addition, the fact that there is no pre-existing experience to compare with will most likely help in making it a far less contentious point. Lastly, the existence of games such as World of Warships and Dreadnought indicate that demand for similar gameplay does exist in a PvP setting. In regards to equipment balance, once again, one of the main qualms people often voice is in regards to the importance of either hit scan or large AoE, basically things which can kill easily, as most weapons will kill most tenno in a low number of hits, and frames are already quite difficult to hit due to the high mobility. Since Railjack is a new mode coming with new equipment and lower mobility, these issues are relatively non-existent, or irrelevant. In regards to player skill, this is an entirely different ballpark. I do believe that there would be a large amount of skill expression, especially when playing in groups, so the establishment of a skill-based matchmaking system may be warranted, but it does remain to be seen. I would also like to note that the fact that Conclave doesn't really have a skill-based matchmaking system, at least not one that really seems to work, is probably due to its very low player population, and the fact that Railjack is almost destined to be at least somewhat more popular than Conclave, should help remedy that. The other few points are either irrelevant or inevitable. Once again, there won't be an issue with gameplay habit disparity as it's a new mode. Lag will almost always exist in a peer-to-peer setting, although hopefully the relatively slower gameplay in Railjack will help offset its effects. In addition, we could once again look into player-hosted servers. And the low population of Conclave is, I believe, largely a byproduct of its poor relaunch perception, and with proper management and communication, it should be possible to avoid a similar fate for Railjack. As previously stated, PvP is inevitably a golden tool for any online game to use if it wants to increase its engagement and long-term replayability. As we've already explored why Warframe's previous forays into PvP have not been spectacularly successful, here I will attempt to instead talk about the merits of integrating a PvP experience into Warframe, and why specifically Railjack is well suited to this task. Along with the lack of an endgame, one of the largest criticisms often tossed at Warframe by its veterans is the lack of the need or incentive to coordinate between squad mates. While at a base level, some missions and groups do choose to go into a mission with specific setups, the level of coordination within any squad rarely goes above specifying specific areas or timings. This is especially true in the current meta, as the most endgame or skill-intensive content outside of Eidolons is essentially endurance runs which prioritize stability and ease over precision, which inevitably leads to a lower need for communication. Interestingly, one of the areas which showcased this point best was raid speedruns. I know, I'm a raid shill. While speedruns currently still do exist, the vast majority are conducted solo, and are thus both uncoordinated and generally uncreative. Raid speedruns, however, required precise communication, a high level of skill expression, and very attentive gameplay, which led to an interesting and frenetic experience. Such an experience is one we are missing from the game in its current state. Railjack PvP would bring back the essence of such an experience, as we have already seen that the multi-crew and multi-role setup necessitates for there to be communication. Another important facet of PvP experiences are that they are competitive. We have, in Warframe history, seen a lot of competitive players, especially when it comes to events, so it is evident that the player base for competition does exist. Why then, one might ask, do things like Sanctuary Onslaught leaderboards go relatively unnoticed and uncompeted over? The answer, I believe, is relatively simple. The fact that Sanctuary Onslaught and other node leaderboards are endurance competitions means that it is far more difficult to organize, conduct, and experiment with. Once again, I would like to turn your attention to raid speedruns. While many players were no doubt unaware that there was a competitive speedrunning scene, the large viewerships and donation counts events such as Tenor Without Borders received speaks for itself. And why were speedruns so popular? I believe it's because, as previously stated, they shared extremely high levels of skill expression, coordination, creativity, and practice. In addition, they were relatively short affairs, so one could repeat runs very frequently in a small amount of time, and they were fairly easy to organize and run. Lastly, Railjack PvP, and by extension coordinated PvP, would bring back many functionalities that groups within Warframe have liked so far. Bringing a competitive team PvP mode would incentivize players to make better use of their communication circles, such as clans, alliances, or other external groups. This would lead to the importance of such groups rising, and thus will lead to greater investment from players in these relevant social circles. In conclusion, Railjack PvP could potentially succeed where Conclave failed, due to the many different implementations inherent in the game mode we have already seen. Furthermore, its implementation would be greatly beneficial to Warframe, as it will help alleviate such criticisms such as a lack of endgame, or the lack of experiences which require high skill expression and coordination.